Hello, everyone. This is Father Michael Tischel.
And this is Strati Papageorgiou.
And we are
An Imperfect Podcast.
Bing.
Was that off enough? Cue music.
So,
How you doing?
it's been a little while.
It has been a little while. Tell me about your...
I'm staring at you, and I'm having a very hard time not looking at your shirt. Especially on this Wednesday, which is a fast day, and you're wearing a shirt with a tasty burger on it and a hamburger just kind of like radiating with this sort of semi-divine light.
Semi-divine. I wear things, and I just assume they're not inappropriate.
No, I don't.
No. What I mean is, I don't really pay attention to what I wear.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't. Never thought about that. It's this is a hamburger.
You didn't spend hours selecting your wardrobe this morning.
Milliseconds.
Well, that's better is one day in the wardrobe than 1,000.
Oh no. I've been told I'm a great roommate on trips and stuff.
Yeah.
I only spend like 15 minutes in the shower.
Yeah.
Go in there, shower, brush teeth, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, boom, bada bing, bada boom.
Yeah, efficiency.
That's
good.
I don't need to sit contemplate reality under the shower head.
No.
We got to see things.
Places to go, people to see.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, Tasty Burger.
Tasty Burger.
It's a good place.
It was given to me by a friend.
Really?
Yeah.
Have you ever been to the actual establishment?
No.
Oh, it's worth it.
Is it?
California. Yeah. Probably other places, but I've been there in California, and they've got some tasty burgers.
I've never been to the
West Coast.
Far west. Yeah, I've been to like Arizona.
Yeah, okay. That counts. Yeah,
but I haven't been to like the coast.
Okay. Yeah, it's beautiful.
It
depends on where you go, but
sure.
Yeah,
I've been told it has a lot of the same the climate as Cyprus. Yeah, like kind of a dry.
Yes.
Heat.
Yeah.
Although that depends on where you go in Cyprus.
Sure.
The coast can be kind of
wet.
Yeah, wet,
moist,
considering that it's water.
Right. Yeah.
So tell me, what have you been up to?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Well, let's see. We've had a busy little last month here.
More.
Yeah. So I went to Greece. I think we recorded a podcast right before I left. And I was there for a little over a week. I was in Thessaloniki. Was able to do some research there at the School of Theology at Aristotle University. Meet with some professors and do some research, and got to venerate a lot of the holy sites there, which was beautiful.
What is your I already know, obviously, but what is your dissertation or your degree on?
Oh yeah. Well, it's on food science, actually. Yes. I study my food and then I eat it.
I try not to think about it.
Yeah, that's good. That's probably better. Just eat. Kind of shove it in.
No,
there.
but what do you actually? If it's not a secret,
it's not a secret. I am studying theology generally.
Right.
A little more specifically, dogmatics, and then even more specifically, I have been recently looking at the writings of Saint John Chrysostom. In particular, his treatment of this concept of exephnis, which is a term that kind of packs a punch and has a long standing tradition both within the ancient Greek philosophical writings of Plato and Aristotle, and then also in the Christian Judeo-Christian tradition, starting from the Old Testament, actually. The way that the Septuagint translates the Hebrew word pitom is exephnis, and it's a word that's kind of surprising in the sense that it denotes moments of surprise. In the Old Testament and in pre-Socratic ancient Greek writings, it's primarily used in negative circumstances. So when an unexpected and sudden fire breaks out in Homer's Odyssey, the word exephnis appears in the Old Testament when there are unexpected tragic events and occurrences when entire people groups are wiped out. Oftentimes exephnis will appear, but it takes a shift, and the word kind of is transformed towards the end. And in the book of Malachi in the Old Testament, where the Lord enters into the temple suddenly in a very positive way, and then also with the starting with the writings of Plato, he uses it primarily in a positive and kind of mystical manner. To discuss this kind of sudden revelation of the good or the true or the beautiful at the end of a long and extended journey. So to make a long story short, I'm looking at this notion of, really surprise in the writings of St. John Chrysostom. So a theology of surprise.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about what you were what you are doing with regard to that. And then you got sick.
And then I got sick. Surprise! Was not expecting that.
In Greek, xafnika.
Xafnika, exactly.
Suddenly.
Right, which it's definitely a related term.
Indeed.
I got home on the eve of the Feast of St. Demetrius, and then that morning of the 26th, we were serving liturgy, and from Orthodox all the way up through liturgy, I started feeling myself getting more and more sick.
Oh, man.
And then I went home, and I was just kind of toast. I had a really bad sinus. Cold, and then I kind of spent the next week fighting my way through that, and thought I was getting a lot better. My parents came to visit, and then the next Saturday morning I woke up with chills and a really bad fever, and ended up getting a whole nother bug from my son, which was essentially an adult version of hand, foot, and mouth disease. Which was very fun. And I'm now cured, and so I'm grateful to be in the land of the living.
Not gonna lie, I'm feeling a little
sick just hearing about it.
No, on my way here.
Oh, no.
Something started to feel off, and I went right back in the house and took a multivitamin.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you did that.
I was like, oh.
Not gonna let this happen.
No.
Exactly.
Say no
to your disease.
I'm going to be drinking water.
Yes, a lot of water.
A lot of water, so. Anyway.
Parastika.
Suddenly, surprisingly, Efcharisto, by the way. Suddenly I...
Right.
So this episode, we decided to talk about surprise.
Right.
And as we tend to do, as the pattern of our show here, is we usually talk about the basic level of what a surprise is. Yeah. Which we kind of have.
Well, I mean, even just etymologically speaking, I mean, I don't know the etymology of the word surprise, but it does have a very, the term onomatopoeia, where it's like...
If it's Latin.
It might be, yeah. It sounds like what it is, so like a rushing wind.
Surprise!
Yeah, it kind of has this surprise, it's like this lead up where it's surprise, and it just pops out of nowhere, right? So even the word itself, it's kind of it's like...
Well, there was this beautiful moment when we went to somebody's house and your son was there, remember? And it was kind of...
I mean, I remember going to a house at one point and my son being there, but...
Well, we all came.
Yes.
And he started yelling, surprise.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
That was one of the cutest moments.
Yeah, well...
He was very excited.
Kids have a way of doing that.
But...
Yeah, so that's... I mean, what is a surprise? What's that actual experience or phenomenon?
It's usually something you don't expect.
Don't expect. So you have a certain, maybe conscious or even subconscious expectation about how things are going to go.
Right.
And things go
differently.
Very non-linear. You're going in this one trajectory, and you think you're heading in one direction, and something comes totally out of nowhere to hit you on the head and knock you out and render you unconscious, and then you end up in the hospital in a coma. No.
I mean, that could happen.
That's the catastrophic
that could happen.
Surprise that we don't want. But So, yeah, so surprise.
That was a surprise.
That you were not expecting.
I wasn't expecting it to go that
either.
way.
I wasn't either.
So
sometimes we surprise ourselves.
So we surprise ourselves. Well.
Okay, so something unexpected. It's unexpected in the sense that we have this sense of where we're going, and it takes us in a very different direction. In what other ways is it like? What are there any other elements to a surprise, like from just like an experiential perspective, like?
Well, I think of surprise. I guess usually we think of it in this context right now. The way my brain is going, I was originally thinking of it as in a positive.
Yeah.
You know, what a surprise.
Yeah.
But then now that
right, it's not necessarily
positive. You know, not necessarily a positive. It could be an unwelcome surprise.
Unwelcomed, right?
Yeah.
So unexpected expectation is a little bit more neutral than welcome, right? So unexpected, it could be negatively unexpected or positively unexpected, whereas unwelcomed, it's pretty clear that you don't want it.
Right.
Undesired, unwelcomed.
Yeah. Which it could still a surprise.
Right.
When you're not expecting it.
Yep. Because you could be expecting the worst.
Right.
And something could surprise you in a good way, or you could have that sense of expectation, like a very kind of like positive charged sense of expectation,
and then nothing,
and you're surprised by the fact that nothing happens.
Speaking of the word surprise, I would recommend a great book called Surprised by Christ. I forgot the name of the author.
Father James Bernstein.
Okay, perfect. It is an excellent book.
Never read it, but it's here. Yes, it's in our library.
We're in a library right now, by the way, people.
Yes. Which is why we're speaking so loudly. But no one else is in here.
Cyprus in history.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's in here somewhere. I have seen it.
Yes.
Surprisingly, we cannot find it.
It is a great book. I'll just quick.
Yeah. Why don't you just spoil all the surprises of the book? Go ahead. No, please.
He's a Jew who becomes a Christian.
Yeah. Well, spoiler alert.
I feel bad now. Maybe I shouldn't tell it. Should I?
No. You should tell it.
Should I?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot to the book.
I mean, the title sort of gives it away.
Well, yeah, he basically prays. I'll sum up the point, that part of the book that is surprised by Christ. The book is big. I mean, it's
a fairly large.
Yeah, it's a decently large book, and it's not really just about his life experience. It actually goes into a very theological. Some people, I remember we were doing a book club, and some people didn't like it because it was too theological.
Okay.
I would argue that it's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I learned so much about Christian history and theology through that book.
Nice.
Yeah. But the part where it's about being surprised by Christ was that, so he was raised Jewish in the United States, probably New York, I don't remember. And he was starting to veer to, he prays essentially because he felt an emptiness whenever he prayed. And he prays and prays and prays, and what he found was Christ. Kind of is a summary of what happens. I mean, it's more specific in the book.
So yeah, so he he didn't necessarily feel a lack of Christ. He just felt a lack of something.
Anything. He just felt like,
and he was surprised by Christ.
That Christ filled that void, and that for him was.
And he didn't have any context per se for that because he was a Jew.
Right.
So he wasn't like expecting Christ.
I don't remember if he had at this point any exposure to Christ or to Christianity or anything. I don't remember.
Maybe just on
which is perfect for anybody listening to this. They can go read it and find out.
Yes.
So it's not a total spoiler.
Yes.
But his like family sent him to rabbis, and I think they sent him to Israel, if I'm not mistaken. Citation needed.
Yep.
And to trying to get him back. I think they just sent him to rabbis and things like that to convince him to not or whatever. But he ended up, he's a priest. He's an Orthodox priest now.
Right.
But yeah, that he prayed to God to reveal himself, and somehow Christ is what appeared to him. You know. Yeah,
which is a really interesting phenomenon, a real spiritual phenomenon that happened to him.
Right.
But I think from that and from other phenomena that we can read about in Scripture, for example, the Apostle Paul, right? Is a great example of that. Oh my goodness. Right?
Yeah.
Apostle Paul, and by the way, little plug for exephnis, the term that I'm studying, that's used in the account of St. Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus.
Very cool.
He's riding on the road towards Damascus to persecute Christians, right? And then exephnis, he's knocked off his horse and he receives this revelation of Christ, of God, who's asking him why is he persecuting him, and so I mean it's a real element, and I think from these different phenomena we can sort of extrapolate a certain theological truth, which is what theology is all about anyway. It's like you take experiences and you extrapolate truth. You found it?
Yeah.
Nice. And so what is that truth? I think, if I would be so bold as to posit or to just kind of drop this bomb on the table, which is that I don't think that faith is faith unless it's surprising. In other words, I don't think we can be Christians and not be continuously surprised by God.
Yeah.
Because I think God is by nature surprising.
Yeah.
And Christ is by nature surprising.
And it doesn't have to be something so profound.
No.
As of course
as a road to Damascus.
Road to Damascus, where he was knocked off his horse and God rendered him blind, and that was kind of his. For anybody who didn't know, just saying.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be anything as dramatic as that. I mean, it could be simply just a divine liturgy.
Sure.
Where you feel, I don't know, something touches you, and that's a surprise sort of.
But I would argue that, and I know what you mean by saying that it doesn't need to be as profound, in the sense that when we read that account, it makes it look like a big experience, right? Like St. Paul is riding his horse and it's like this crazy revelation, right? But it's a feeble description of an incredibly deep and profound spiritual experience, right?
Sure.
And I would argue that those small moments of surprising transformation or revelation, even within a simple divine liturgy, while they may be
seemingly small,
or they may be sort of like, a little bit scaled down compared to those things, they're comprised of the same content.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
And source.
Yeah. Right? It's just perhaps you could say a micro version, but even with the St. Paul experience, that was comprised of moments. Right? And yes, maybe there was a sense of like,
we heard a voice, right?
Yeah, he heard a voice. It was, there was like this blinding light, right? So it was a little bit more distilled. On one level, maybe his receptivity somehow was more ready based on his zeal, even though he was a zealous persecutor of Christians, right? We know that he was zealous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was not doing it sort of out of any sense of hypocrisy. He was totally sort of focused on his task and his mission as misguided as it was.
Right.
So I think there's something interesting about examining those individual seemingly, seemingly insignificant moments.
Yeah, sure. No.
And like when you really zoom in on the moment,
it's bigger than it.
It's bigger than you think. And,
since the source is so huge.
Exactly. The source is like
incomprehensible.
Completely incomprehensible. It's just that we get such a quick flicker, of what's behind the curtain, you could say, that it's like, we just passed by it. But really, what happened? Maybe it's that we're not focused on the right sort of region of our self, the right region of our consciousness. We're so absorbed in our minds and in our flesh and in our, in our kind of like materiality or in our intellectuality or whatever, that the meeting point, the road, right, to Damascus, right, is somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so this profound experience that we're having in liturgy, right, is just as almost just as profound as what the Apostle Paul had, but it's more peripheral. If that makes sense, right? Because our focus is here, and like I'm pointing in one direction here physically, and the experience is down here in some other
He's pointing
part.
at another area.
Right. The experience itself is just as impressive, right? Right.
Yeah.
But it's in the periphery of my consciousness.
Could it be also argued it's given what you need?
Yeah,
I don't need to be blinded and
yes, I think
horse
that's a big part of it. Yeah,
you know, and God gives us what we need when we need it.
Sure. Yeah.
You could, you know, yeah.
Yeah. We don't need a huge. Yeah, we don't need a huge thing. We need these insignificant things. There's something humbling too about that, right? That what I need is just a flicker, not a.
Well, let me throw this one instance at you, and just within this context, because I think it's interesting, because I do wonder if it has to do with how open a person is to an experience. Maybe just throw it out there. So we have a children's video coming out. Well, it's for 10 and up, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, it's not for little kids. About Saint Paisios as a child.
Wonderful.
And although it's about one of the more difficult aspects of reality, because it's about a young man. Well, so Saint Paisios was kind of odd as a child,
right?
Very quiet, and very monastic, even as a child. Yeah, he liked to pray. He liked to stay up at night at vigils, and he read spiritual books as a little, you know, I don't know how old he was, a little kid, yeah. And so, you know, kids would kind of poke fun at him a little bit, and his brother would hide away his books, and I think his mother was worried about his health because he fasted. Yep. Anyway, and one day this older kid comes, and this guy was a college student, I guess, and was learning about Darwin, but just in general, just sort of, I guess. Yeah, Darwin, but not just the theory of
but
atheism more of an atheistic worldview, maybe deistic, maybe even, where he basically challenges him and says, "Well, Christ was not a good man; it was just a good man and not God." Right. That's a big, big statement. Big statement,
especially to a little kid.
To a little kid
who's very innocent and faithful at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
So this horrified little Arsenios, because that was his name. Right. He wasn't Paisios yet.
Right.
And he went and I think you know the story, but for anybody who doesn't know, he runs to a chapel, the chapel of St. Barbara, and he's there all night. He's praying all night, and then nothing happens. You know, he feels nothing. Right. There's no revelation.
He's sort of exhausted.
He's exhausted. And he says, he kind of simply and humbly says, well, you know, even if he's not God, basically, I still love him, and and even if he was just a good man, he still deserves the love and whatever, you know, and all that. Yep. And then suddenly Christ appears to him, and says to him, "I am the." I forgot the exact. I am the light.
Revealing himself as God.
Reveal himself as God.
Right.
And from then on, this person continued and was a saint. Doesn't do justice. You know, the word saint doesn't do justice to what he was. A phenomenon in a sense. You know. So.
Yeah. Well, and maybe if I may just interject for a moment.
That's not interjecting. It's one. I want you to answer it.
No. I don't have an answer, but one. Well,
what I mean is, I brought it up. Yeah. Just because that doesn't happen to me or to you or to too many people. Absolutely. And why did it happen to him? Maybe you don't have an answer to that specifically.
Well, no, not. I mean, well, one thing that emerged when I was listening to you recount that that interesting story is that God knew and knows, though he doesn't control St. Paisios' life because of his free will, he does know the course of his life.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think there is something to be said for the knowledge of the faithfulness of St. Paisios in a certain sense, and kind of like knowing what sort of person he was
and would be,
that God chose to reveal himself in that manner based on the fact that he knew that St. Paisios was a very faithful person.
Yeah. Again, it's actually the same thing as I was saying, what everybody needs.
Right, because I think there's a sense that, for many of us, I would say for myself for sure, if we were to receive such a revelation, right, then we would also be receiving an equivalent expectation for our lives. And I think for many of us, we can't handle that level of lifestyle that such a revelation entails. Like to have seen Christ as God, right? How then?
What do I do?
Yeah, what can you possibly do after that? And most of us, we would go back to our materiality, and such a fall, from a vision of Christ back to our material state would be pretty traumatic, I think, to go from that height back to my kind of fickle sort of...
Or to add to that, pride could enter you.
Sure.
I saw Christ. Hey, guys.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, how cool am I?
Right,
I actually saw Christ. And
exactly.
He knew that this person would not.
Right. Or at least would have a very good fighting chance of not.
Sure.
He did know.
He did know. We know free will.
Right.
We're not taking that out of the
yes. But he did know, yeah.
He knew. He knew that he wouldn't.
He did know that.
But so that
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a surprise, though. I mean, I'm sure he didn't expect to see Christ.
No. If he did expect to see Christ, then Christ probably wouldn't have appeared. Right?
That's usually how it goes.
Yeah.
I've also heard stories of monks on Mount Athos. When Christ did appear, they won't look at him.
Interesting.
They wouldn't look at him. They would just look away. I'm not where I don't want to see you.
Of
course, that could be multiple things. Humility, but also maybe it's not Christ.
Right. Sure.
Who knows? But anyway, I just want to throw that in there.
Yeah.
But so I guess the beauty of surprise, and when you told me us do one on surprise, every time I think you tell me, I'm just like, what?
What can we possibly talk about?
I know this will work out. Well, I say to myself, but
that's very.
I have no idea what we're going to talk about. Well, so far so
good.
So good. So I just assume that it'll work out, right? Yeah. But but it's actually a prominent part of the human experience in relation to God. He surprises us. He's not, and it's not just then. It's also with Elijah, and the story of Elijah. Plug. It's our channel. I can plug it.
Definitely.
Our video on Prophet Elijah. Please check it out if you haven't. But
well worth the viewing.
I like watching it. Yeah. But Elijah, I think he was surprised many times.
Right.
And not only that, but not only was he surprised, but none of it's magic. So he goes up to pray for rain. God told him, "Go do it. I'll send rain down when you do this."
Right.
Right. The thing happens. The fire comes down, burns the whole burnt offering.
Yep.
And then he has to pray 7 times for rain to come down.
Yep.
I think that's a surprise.
Yeah.
It's surprising that it takes 7 times, and then when it was time, God allowed it.
Right.
So he's not, I guess it shows that God is living, and that he picks his time to do something.
Exactly.
It's on his time.
Right. So God is a God of surprises.
Yeah.
It's just that the surprises, because they are surprises, don't come in the way we expect.
Right.
And in the time when we expect. And I mean, it's, why is God a God of surprises? Because I think God's reality, who God is constantly exceeds who we are and the way that we exist and the way that we think, and constantly, goes outside of that, the bounds of that.
Yeah.
And we can never grasp sort of who God is and what he's all about. And because of that inability to grasp God, we're always being surprised. And I mean, on one level, you could say that is agonizing, because it's like, if my happiness in life boils down to what I can control, which I think for many of us, we struggle with that. It's like, I need to feel some sense of control or stability in my life. And if I don't, then I'm very unhappy because I need predictability, right? Like,
we're fickle.
Yeah,
because we want predictability, but we like to be surprised.
Right, exactly. We want surprise as long as it's within our framework of control. It's like, as long as, generally speaking, we know where things are going, it's like we like a little peppering of surprise, right? But I think what God offers us is actually the opposite in many ways. It's like no, abandon yourself completely to an uncreated God, right? In other words, you, a creature, are called to abandon yourself completely and surrender yourself completely to a God who is not a creature, who's not limited, who's not bound by any form of anything, right? And that's a fearsome thing, to surrender myself into the handless hands of God. Yeah. So we are going to be entering into, right, the realm of capital S surprise. Right, where nothing is what we think it is. Nothing is what we expect it to be. Nothing has anything to do with what we know, basically, in our limited created state.
And throughout history, humans have called it luck. They've called it fortune.
Yep.
We've given it all sorts of different names,
right,
as misfortune. Yeah. I wasn't fortunate enough.
Right. Yeah, I think in many ways we could say that surprise is sort of surprises, good surprises. But yeah, surprises, I think the nature of surprises is good. I would go so far as to say that. But anyway, surprises are maybe always, maybe most of the time, are cracks in the wall between our created reality and God's reality, and it's little moments of God's reality poking through into our reality, and it's little sort of slivers of awareness of God's reality, which, if we were to enter into that fully, we'd be, in many ways, in a beautiful way, but in many ways totally disoriented. And as I said before, we oftentimes want control with a little bit of surprise sprinkled on. But what God's offering is surprise, with a facade of control. I don't know, like sprinkled on. So it's like, it's a total paradigm shift. And it takes a complete surrender of all expectations and all scenarios and all desires and everything, to come to this sense of who God is in a very different way than who we are.
Right. Well, I want to go back to Elijah just for a minute. And I think another surprise came when, at this point, in the history of humanity, this is before the incarnation, right?
Right.
So before the Word became
flesh. Surprise.
That's the biggest surprise of all.
The Word becoming flesh.
One of the biggest surprises of all, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
We're jumping ahead. Let's jump back. So Elijah, after he has the experience on Mount Carmel where fire comes down and burns the whole burnt offering, and water or rain starts, something else happens, and then he flees in fear because they're trying to kill him. And he goes to Mount Sinai, which is pretty far away. If anybody looks at a map where Sinai is and where Israel is to walk, it's pretty far. I've actually done the journey through with a bus. It takes some time, but can't even imagine walking it and the heat and the sun and then all that. Anyway, he goes there and suddenly God asks him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" and he kind of complains. It's all good. Old Testament,
right?
Jonah, anyway,
right?
He kind of complains, and he says, here I am. I'm the only one left.
Right.
He thinks he's the only one left, and who believes in the true God. And, and then, and then God says, "Go outside," because he's in a cave, and he go outside, and I'm gonna come by.
Right.
He goes outside, and suddenly, I don't remember the order. No,
right.
I do remember the order. I made the video. A gust of wind,
right?
A powerful wind, starts blowing through, strong enough to shake the mountain.
Right.
And then, but God wasn't in it.
Right.
He wasn't there.
Right.
And then, or at least he couldn't feel God in it. Right.
Yeah.
And then, fire explodes, and but God wasn't in that.
Right.
And then a little breeze. Is that right?
Yeah. Small voice.
Right.
Just a small.
Still small voice and a breeze comes by. I think we've even mentioned this in another video.
We may have
podcast that I remember, but I think that surprise
is
what is like the surprises we get, the small ones.
Yes. Yep.
And I think that's fascinating because that's God He's kind of showing himself in all his capacities.
Yeah.
Yep. He can do all these things.
All his potential
revelations,
and especially as the human mind would conceive of the Almighty God revealing Himself. It would be in a mighty wind, or it would be in fire, or something like that.
Right. Instead, it's in a little...
And this is as you said, it's pre-incarnate, right?
Pre-incarnate,
which is kind of a powerful prefiguration of the sort of Messiah we would receive.
Right.
Would he be the Messiah that comes and conquers the
Romans? That's not even in our video. That's good.
We're building on things one step at a time.
It might be at the end, I don't remember, but that's great. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's very exciting, actually. It's God.
God is brilliant.
All of it's amazing.
Yeah. And in relatively speaking, the Messiah that we received was the still small voice.
The still small voice.
Right? Historically speaking, as far as, what the Messiah could have been or could have done.
Right. Could have done.
The Messiah that we got was so quote unquote insignificant. So just like slipped in.
He's not even in history books outside the apostles, really.
Right.
And
Josephus, right?
Josephus mentions him, sure.
Yeah, but he just slips into history, slips out.
Yeah.
Right? Only 3 years of his ministry are known. Right? Of his 33 years on this earth.
Right.
The rest is just totally hidden.
Yeah.
Except for that one little blip when we hear about him as a young...
Cana.
Yeah. Well, yeah, right. Well, as a 12-year-old.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like we barely know anything about this guy, and what we do know.
And look at the shockwaves.
Yeah, the shockwaves, how he's hated, I mean, his whole existence on earth is
fleeting,
and just like just like a breath, just like
that's so good.
Yeah, and yet, I mean, that little
thing is
breath just revolutionized everything. I mean, even someone who doesn't believe that Jesus is God has to admit that he had an impact on the course of history.
There's no doubt that just from the perspectives of philanthropy,
right?
And I mean, the first first hospitals, first organized hospitals, caring for orphans, elderly people, widows, whatever you have, were
social services
were by the early church fathers.
Right.
Well, Basil the Great, organized the first hospitals in Constantinople. And actually, that after that was, as time went by, was a government.
Right.
Later, as Christianity continued to permeate through the Roman Empire, it became part. There was positions in the government for these philanthropic. The orphanotrophos was the one who was in charge of the orphanages, for instance. Even on that humanistic, basic humanitarian level, you can't argue.
Yep. So I mean the influence of such a still small voice of Christ, is amazing. So here's a very practical question.
Let's do it.
And maybe this will kind of wrap us up. I don't know where we're at time wise, but so practically speaking, right? Those of us who have lived in the church for any number of years, or really just any human being that's kind of, grown and matured to their adult years, I think wrestles with the struggle of like boredom and tedium and the sense of like, oh yeah, I know. Yeah, so you read the Bible, you read the old familiar stories, and it's like you can have this experience, at least momentary or maybe for an extended period of time, that like nothing surprises me anymore. It's like I read the incarnation story and it's like, oh, that's cute, or something like that. No, I'm serious.
No, I'm laughing because it's so true.
Yeah, it's a nice story, but it's like my ears. It's almost impossible for my ears to not just kind of like turn off and to kind of like. Yeah, I mean,
I think it's been.
I'm like this ground that's just been, planted and harvested so many times, plowed, and everything. It's like I have no more sort of fertility for surprise.
Isn't it that you can't plow too much,
right?
Or too
you have to
frequently or something like
rotate,
that. You have to rotate.
Plots of ground.
Right, or it gets. Worn out or something.
Right. It's not going to be.
I'm not a farmer, but
right. So it's like for us, I mean, it's like, what is that phenomenon of kind of?
And the older you get, probably the harder that.
In some, I think. I mean,
harder. The more used to the world you get used to mundane sort of.
So I mean, I think in many ways we have to come to terms with the fact that Christianity and our faith in Christ and God are by nature surprising. And if we are not experiencing God as a surprise, if we're not experiencing Christ as a surprise, if we're not experiencing reading Scripture as a surprise, right, then something's not where it should be, right? And that's not to say that it's, a horrible thing, we have to freak out or anything like that. It's just to say that's we're coming to terms with.
I remember listening to lectures about, by Metropolitan Athanasius of Limassol.
Yeah.
And he talked about like monastics that go through the same thing.
Oh yeah.
It's like they go to the
drive.
At first it's very exciting.
Right.
They go to all the services.
Everything is a surprise.
Oh, everything's a surprise. It's so exciting. It's so exciting. And as they keep going, it's like it suddenly starts to slow down.
Yep. Yep.
And then they start to wonder, oh no,
Nothing is exciting.
Oh no, it's not exciting anymore.
Right.
and then
people start to annoy them. And
well, sure, yeah. But the advice was
sure.
Well, of course, as you said, there very realistically, then things can start to annoy them if they don't do it the right way. They can become.
Yeah.
Anyway, they can
everything sort of.
Yeah. But the advice is to just push through that, continue with fervor, and you will continue, and then it will ramp back up again at some point in different ways and maybe in surprising ways.
Yeah. Well, it's almost as though...
So it's true for everybody. It's not just for lay people, but also for those who are immersed in constant prayer.
The professionals.
If you may.
Yep.
Although they don't get paid for it. But
yeah, exactly.
Even for them. So don't think just because we live in the world, it's
because we live in the world.
It's because we live in the world that, no, it's everybody. Yeah. It's every human.
Yeah. We go to a monastery to visit, and it's filled with surprises, but the people that are living in the monastery are actually dealing with a very intense struggle as far as that could be concerned.
Sure.
So I mean, I think part of this struggle is that the feeling of dryness is a surprise to us, right? We expect it to be exciting, and just to continue being exciting. Yeah. So I think we have to come to terms with the surprise that feels very unwelcomed, right? The seemingly negative surprise of not feeling any surprises, right?
Yeah.
Because that's a surprise.
Yeah,
right?
It is.
We don't expect that.
Yeah.
We don't expect
when you're,
the enthusiasm that we experience to taper off, because in many ways, in our minds, that tapering off and that kind of that ramping down, right, means either that our enthusiasm was misguided and our initial, our devotion to this enterprise is misguided, and that maybe God doesn't even exist, or just that things are not the way that we thought they were, right? So it kind of shakes us in that sense, or that we're doing something wrong,
right?
So it's like it generates these very disorienting thoughts about ourselves or reality in general. And
I think that starts. I'm sorry. I think that starts as a child. When you're little, everything's exciting.
Right.
I mean,
so we expect
part,
it to be.
And so as you become like 10, when you get to the age of 10, 11, everything starts becoming
right.
Oh,
it's like summers. I think about summers a lot. As a child, summers are they just feel like. For most children, I think
especially since you grew up north where it's cold and summer is such a it's
a beautiful and you just think of summers, you go and you play with your friends and it's just like this extended, just like everything is a surprise, right? Everything is a
and there's another element to all of this too. Father George, wonderful priest here in Marietta, he once told me that I forget, I'm just going to misquote him completely, but he just kept saying, he said to me how my generation is constantly looking for entertainment and something to entertain and maybe surprise.
Yep.
And I think he was reflecting on his own experience from a different world in Greece, man's 90, I think.
Right.
Where they learned kind of like a more, I don't know.
Yeah.
A less stimulating everyday expectation.
Right.
They weren't expecting every day to be stimulating. And so for me, where's the new TV show?
Right.
Or the new episode? And then that lull, I feel this boredom. And, I hate. I don't like. I'm bored.
Yep.
And then I get that stimulation again.
Yep.
And then it subsides again. So it's kind of a fun. I think it's always been in the human existence.
Yeah.
This is a more secular, of course, component to all this.
Sure.
It's still relevant.
Absolutely.
So I think that's interesting, and I think we need to keep that in mind as we go through our lives. I know I do regularly, and I suffer from it every day.
Yeah.
That I'm constantly looking for something to entertain me, to stimulate me.
Right. Yep.
When really, really I need to take in life as it comes.
Right.
And just the moment.
Yep.
And I'm preaching to.
No, it's yeah.
You know, I'm like, I'm saying things that I should be. You know, doing.
Well, it's almost like, I mean, what I hear in what you're saying and what we're talking about is the necessity of contentment.
Yeah.
You know, like...
Well, we were raised with video games. We were raised with TV shows that came out weekly. All this stuff.
Yep.
Lots of lights.
Still a lot of stimulation.
A lot of stimulation. Father George grew up in a village in Greece.
Right.
You know, there was no TV. There probably wasn't even electricity.
Yeah.
There was none of that constant stimulation.
Yep.
So then he doesn't feel that...
restlessness.
That restlessness when it's not there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He still watches TV, but if it's not there, he knows how to cope with it.
Mm-hmm. Coping with the absence of stimulation,
surprise, entertainment, surprise,
yeah. And I mean that's really what it comes down to. I mean, I think whether or not you grew up in an environment that was super stimulating, on a more ultimate level, all human beings struggle with and have to learn how to cope with the lack of surprise, right?
I just thought I would throw
I think it's a very good
it hit me when he said it because it was an interesting perspective from a person that lived in a different world than I did, and I'm much younger than he is. I think he told me he has 65 years on me or something.
Nice.
You know, just to put it in the context.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think what it comes down to is that we just have to come to terms with the fact that God's completely different than we are.
Right.
You know, and that, and we have to sort of surrender ourselves to that otherness of God, you know, and you know, continually come back to the sense that not hold our expectations with such a tight grasp. Yeah. You know, and to kind of just let life wash over us and you know, be able to kind of roll with the punches and you know, navigate life in this sense of not letting our feathers get too ruffled by things that we think don't fit into our kind of paradigm for how things ought to go. And I think the more flexible we can become in that, the more kind of limber and sort of subtle and supple and spontaneous that we can become in the midst of all that, the more I think open we become to receiving God's presence in a real way. Yeah. And rather than sort of trying to force God into our...
There's that too.
You know,
trying to force it as well.
Yep.
You know, anybody who knows about the prayer rope and Jesus' prayer, it's good to do it. Mm-hmm. Do it. Nobody said, you know, but there is this there is this reality of like, don't force it.
Yeah.
If you're not there right now, you know, it'll come when it's time.
Yeah. Because the Jesus prayer is not a
incantation or a magical...
Right, where it's just like if you say 50 Jesus prayers, then God will come.
It really is you're having a dialogue. Right. You're speaking to somebody.
Yep.
It's just like you and I speaking right now.
Yeah. And I could choose to just not respond.
You could walk right out the door.
Right. Because I'm...
Please don't.
I'm a free agent. So you could be talking to me and I could choose to interrupt you. I could choose to...
We have done several times.
Yes,
I just did it.
You just did it. And I could choose to just stop talking to you and ignore you, you know.
You could.
And you don't know why I'm doing that. I mean, you may assume that I'm doing that because I'm rude, because I don't like you.
Yeah, same thing we do with...
But maybe I'm just trying to teach you a lesson. Right? Maybe I'm trying to ignore you to make you a stronger person. Who knows? Maybe I'm trying to interrupt you because you don't have anything good to say. Oh, boy. And that concludes.
We all know now how Father Michael feels about me.
Oh, no, Strati. I feel quite the opposite.
But I think...
You're a good man.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And you are too.
Thanks.
Let's not... I don't want the people listening thinking that, no, you said it. Oh, my God, he didn't say it back.
Yeah, people say what they say.
But I think it was a wonderful topic.
Yeah.
Which we called surprise,
Mm-hmm.
and it's throughout. We in a way we didn't even scratch the surface of the. I'm sure we didn't scratch even the surface of the examples of surprise,
right,
in just the Gospels or
no.
in the scriptures,
no.
of surprise, right?
Yep.
There's so many.
Jesus works in ways that almost always surprise even his very own disciples.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You know, like they're always questioning why he did that. Shouldn't you have done it this way? You know, we're confused.
You're talking to a Samaritan woman.
Right.
You're talking to a tax collector.
Yeah.
You're going to his house.
You're breaking the Sabbath
You're
law.
breaking the Sabbath law. You're doing all these things that are very surprising.
Very surprising.
For them.
Yep. Within their kind of
with
particular
their worldview.
Yep. And yet, not only was he sort of maintaining the essence of the law, which he himself revealed as God, right?
Yeah, he made it.
He made it. But he was inviting them into this reality that goes beyond the mind, right? Which expects certain things, that goes beyond the senses, mm-hmm. which sort of anticipate certain things based on past experience or whatever. Right. And yet is...
And he surprised everybody.
Yeah.
If you think about it, I mean, he surprised Pontius Pilate, who had nothing to do with
it.
He's just a bystander, you know. He just happened to be the governor of Judea at the time, you know.
Yeah.
He said to him, what was it? Christ was talking about something. He mentioned truth, and you probably remember better than I do.
Oh, yeah, what is truth?
Yeah, and Pontius is like, what is truth?
Yeah.
And just like that in and of itself, I think for Pilate was like, whoa,
right?
What are you talking? What is truth?
Yeah, yeah.
That's surprising for him.
Yeah.
What a deep conversation they're having, and it's supposed to be like a jury judge, right?
Right.
And here they are, they're having like a existential, philosophical, theological.
Yep. I mean, he surprised his disciples by being crucified.
I think it surprised
everybody. But I mean, he warned them over and over and over,
right.
And that just goes to show you, right? If your mind is set on a particular trajectory, if your mind is has a certain expectation of how things are going to go, and it doesn't matter how many times life, God, somebody tells you it's going to go this way, right? You're just going to keep listening to what you think is the way, right? Mm-hmm. And even the disciples, right? Jesus told them over and over and over and over again, the Son of Man came, right, to be spit upon, to be mocked, to be ridiculed, to be crucified, and then he'll rise from the dead. And over and over and over again, they just didn't get it, all the way up until the moment when it happened, when they were still confused.
Do you know why? I mean, why?
Why?
If you kept telling me every single day.
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, I think it's because it was a generational expectation, right? I mean, I'm not an expert, but the Jews.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, the Jews had this ingrained sense of who the Messiah was going to be.
Yeah.
Right. And up until the very end, because we're looking at this story retrospectively, right? We know the end of the story. We know that Jesus rose from the dead, right? Imagine you were a disciple, right, who had no sense of resurrection, right? Resurrection was not an expectation, at least in the loud prophetic sense, right? In the
had overt, a concept of it being
right. There were quiet prefigurations of it, right? But that's the thing, is it was the still small voice, right? But the more kind of like in your face expectation based on prophecies and based on kind of teachings, Jewish teaching was that this Messiah was going to come and was going to save them
liberate them from whatever oppressor
their earthly oppressor, right? Yeah. And so the fact that Jesus would say that he was going to be mocked and ridiculed and persecuted and beaten and ultimately killed, that just, I mean, there's no way. I mean, even if like no matter how many times he said that to them, there just wouldn't be any way that they could hear that.
I get it,
because because they believed that he was the Messiah.
Right.
Right? They believed that he was the Savior.
Their very belief.
Which was true, right? And thank God they believed that.
Right.
And yet their belief needed to be crucified.
Yeah.
Their belief in and of itself needed to die, because even their belief was human, right? And in its death, it was raised. So I mean, surprise also includes crucifixion. It includes you cannot cultivate an ethos of surprise. You cannot live a life of surprise if you're not willing to be crucified. If you're not willing to have your expectations crucified, if you're not willing to have your set sense of things,
ego,
pride, right? And that's all wrapped up in expectations, right? It's like, I know how things are going to go.
Sure.
If you're not willing to have all that crucified and dying on the cross, with Christ, then there's no way that the surprise of the resurrection, right? That the resurrectional surprise can enter into your life. Because otherwise it's still part of my own created existence.
And my perspective, my human perspective,
right.
my own conception.
It's my own thing.
Yeah, that I am creating, but
So
I think we should. I think it's
thank God for surprises.
And
and it doesn't make them easy. It doesn't make it easy for us to be able to kind of to have that approach to life. But thank God for surprises, and I think it all boils down to surprises in many ways, because without surprises, we'd just be stuck in our own sort of closed loop, and God breaks us out of that loop and introduces us to a whole nother reality, but it takes a crucifixion.
And with that, I think, and with crucifixion, and with that, we will conclude this episode of An Imperfect Podcast. Thank you for listening. And,
thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me. We're both hosts on the show.
Co-hosts have to thank each other for having each other on the show.
That was wonderful.
It was.
Thank you all for listening.